Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Russian Attack. We've got the next Play Choice 10 release, and it's another Konami NES title. Something you'll notice here is that this one didn't release on the Versus system like the other third-party Play Choice 10 games so far. There's still a few Versus system games left, but at this point, Nintendo was clearly trying to shift their focus from the Versus system to the Play Choice 10. The next batch of Play Choice 10 games were released sometime in 1987. We can see all of these in a flyer that showed off 6 new games coming to the system. All of these, with the exception of Metroid, were third-party titles. Quick side note, as a reminder, if I have already played the NES version of a Play Choice 10 game, I will not be playing it again, with a few exceptions. That means I will not be playing Metroid again on the Play Choice 10. If you really want to see the info page for that game, or any other Play Choice 10 game I have already played on the NES, you can check out a video on my VOD channel where I take a look at the info pages for those games in particular. Anyway, it can be a little tricky to track down release dates for Play Choice 10 games, and we only know that this flyer came out sometime in 1987. In situations like this, I typically wait until the end of that particular year to play titles with no known release month, but we actually do have a bit more information on 2 of these. In a July issue of the Cashbox magazine, there's an article about Nintendo announcing Russian Attack in 1942, and it says that they are immediately available for purchase. So, what is Russian Attack? Well, this one was another Konami title that originated as an arcade game, and it was known as Green Beret in Europe and Japan. It was apparently a pretty popular arcade machine, and like many other arcade titles, it received a wide variety of ports, including ones to various PC platforms and the NES itself. In Japan, this port was actually an exclusive to the Famicom Disk System. The Play Choice 10 version is of course a port of the NES game back to the arcades. So yes, like Gradius, this was an arcade title that was ported to the NES, then back to the arcades. Alright, let's jump into my time with the game. I've never played this one before, but I received a few comments from my viewers who have fond memories of the title, so let's see how it holds up. On the info page, it tells me that my mission is to capture the enemy weapon and destroy the enemy base. Who exactly are these enemies? Humorously, neither the flyer nor the NES manual explicitly spell out who the enemy is, but considering their appearance and the clear pun in the title, I think we can make a pretty safe bet as to who they're supposed to be. The controls are pretty basic. You move left and right, you can jump, climb ladders, and attack with a knife. The game also features a 2-player mode, and more on that later. The game starts with a brief cutscene of the player parachuting into enemy territory, and it tells you your mission: destroy the enemy's secret weapon. After this, you are thrown right into the action. This game is a side-scrolling beat 'em up, stab 'em up. It actually kind of reminds me of Kung Fu, just with a knife instead of your fists. You've got to move from left to right while endless waves of enemies are charging in. At first, the only enemies you see are these guys that just run in and charge at you. They're pretty easy, but they help to keep you on your toes, and they can really add to the chaos as more enemy types are introduced. Eventually, I ran into some things that looked like mines on the ground. Out of curiosity, I stepped on one and blew up, immediately losing my first life. I guess those mines are one-hit kills. I honestly probably shouldn't have been all that surprised, considering it is a mine after all. On the next attempt, I beat this yellow guy who dropped an extra weapon. These things can only be used 3 times, and they shoot a slow flying missile across the screen. I guess it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but when all you can do is stab right in front of you, these can be pretty useful when things get more hectic. This time, I jumped over the mines and made it through safely. Eventually, I ran into this red guy that jumped up and kicked me in the face when he got close. This also caused me to immediately lose my life. I guess it's not that the mines were powerful, but that you're just fragile. Everything in this game is a one-hit kill, so you've got to be careful. There's a few different ways to deal with these guys, but the strat I first found was to jump up and attack them in the air. This worked well enough, but jumping was always a commitment which would occasionally cause problems. As I made it further through the stage, eventually I reached a spot where a siren went off and boss music started to play. For this first stage, the boss is just a bunch of waves of enemies. A lot of them are red guys though, which can be kind of a problem when they're all lined up like this. I did fine on my first run, but since I occasionally lost a life here, on future runs I would just save the power up and use it during the boss to clear out each wave with a single shot. After clearing the level, it showed my character hopping over a fence and moving on to the next stage. Level 2 was way harder than the previous level. The main reason for this was these nasty guys that hide in these towers and shoot at you constantly. The only saving grace that I didn't realize until later is that they can't shoot directly below themselves, so you can use these spots to help time everything if you need it. This level also introduces another enemy type, these yellow guys who occasionally stop and shoot at you. You can duck under their bullets, but on this stage in particular, they were pretty nasty because ducking forces you to stop, which meant it was easy to get stuck in a spot while the guys in the tower blasted away at you. However, before I even saw a single one of these new enemies, I got wiped out by a red guy and got my first game over. Now for the moment of truth. Can I continue? Nope, not even once. Honestly, the combination of this game's mechanics is kind of nasty. No continues, 5 lives, 1-hit kills, and each time you lose a life, you get sent a certain distance back earlier in the stage. Once you're good enough at the game, it's more than enough lives, but the limited amount of mistakes you can make ends up making it kind of tough to learn the game. You do earn an extra life every 100,000 points, but this generally only happened about once per run. While we're talking about the difficulty, something that made this game a little rough was that the jumping controls were kind of awkward. Instead of having a dedicated jump button, you just pushed up on the D-pad. This made it a little tough to jump diagonally at times, and it made for some weird interactions with the ladders. I get that this is due in part to the limitations of a 2-button controller, but personally, I would have preferred it if they made A be a dedicated jump button, and just made the special weapons some sort of combination, since you jump way more often than you use your specials. There's a seemingly nasty part near the end of level 2 with 5 tower guys in a row, but it honestly wasn't too bad if you took it quickly enough. After this stretch was the boss. This time, there actually was some unique enemies for the boss, as these jetpack guys flew all over the place and launched grenades at me. This seemed super hectic at first, but once I cleared out all the guys on foot, it honestly wasn't all that bad. Phew, level 2 was finally complete. Level 3 was thankfully a bit easier than level 2. A lot of the sections in this level are split up into different floors, and as I replayed the level more and more, I picked the paths I found the easiest. Something kind of interesting I learned here was that the red and brown enemies ignore stairs, while the yellow guys will climb up and down them to hunt you down. It may not seem like much, but I found that it was important to keep track of this when routing the levels. On this level, I found a few more types of power-ups. There was a star power-up, which gave me momentary invincibility, and a gun power-up that I could use to fire as much as I wanted, but like the star, it only lasts for a certain amount of time. These were pretty useful for charging ahead and clearing out enemies quickly. Oh yeah, on the topic of power-ups, there was also a grenade power-up in the game, but I didn't use it a whole lot. On my first try, I ended up making it through the entirety of stage 3 without running out of lives. The boss for this one was just a bunch of dogs that run in from the sides. They don't do anything too tricky, so I just stayed in the middle and attacked them as they ran in. Man, they kind of just look like people with their arms stretched wide when they fall down. Anyway, I cleared level 3 and moved on to level 4. This one was another tough one. There's these guys hiding behind barrels that launch bombs at you. And similar to the guys in the tower, these guys just make things so much more hectic. Over time, I just developed an exact strat for this part to get through it unscathed. There was also this surprisingly tough part later on in the level where they combined the jumping guys with the gun guys. Individually, they aren't too bad, but when you combine them, it's tough to find a way through them without getting hit. This is another section where I just memorized the placements of everyone, and I utilized the fact that only the yellow guys climb ladders to split them up. Man, I was stuck on this level for quite a while. Not only was it just a tough stage, but having to go through all the previous stages with each attempt often left me with not a whole lot of lives to learn the stage. I did get better with time, but only being able to make 4 or 5 mistakes per run isn't really a whole lot. Around this point, I learned about something kind of silly. In this game, when you die, you get sent a certain amount of distance back. It's not based on checkpoints or anything, so if you do bad enough, it's possible to go further and further back with each death. However, for the 2-player mode, this aspect of the game is removed entirely. Instead, when one player loses a life, they respawn immediately back in and no progress is lost. Now, I'm generally not focusing on 2-player content in this challenge, but you can basically turn this mode into a single-player mode by letting the second player lose all of their lives at the start of a run. This doesn't make the game completely free or anything, but it does change where you respawn after losing a life. Is it a bit cheesy? Sure, but it's a feature built into the game, and as long as I still get the ending for playing this way, I'll take it. However, like I said, even with the cheese, it was not free. It took me quite a while to develop enough strats to get through stage 4. While trying to get through this stage, I found out something else that would have been so useful this whole time. You can just run straight through the red guys and they'll jump over you. That made them so much easier to deal with. Eventually, I made it to the boss of stage 4. These dudes fly around in these machines and drop a bunch of grenades everywhere. Once I developed some good strats, the boss wasn't all that bad, but I always arrived with very little life remaining, and it still took me a few tries to figure them out. A big part of it was just realizing that the hitboxes for their grenades are kind of terrible. Up next was level 5, and once again, this one wasn't too bad, for the most part. The biggest difficulty at this point was just keeping my lives high enough to learn the stage. I guess I've moved on to somewhere pretty cold in Russia, as all of their outfits have now changed and the enemies are wearing fur coats. The start of this stage was super easy. You could just run along the top and avoid the enemies, although there was a kind of tricky mine section soon after. I got a few more game overs here, but eventually I had a really good run going. I entered this level with 5 lives still remaining, which was far better than any run before it. During this attempt, I made it to the boss. This one is quick, but pretty brutal. These 3 guys come parachuting in and bombard you with attacks. I tried my best to dodge them, but I ended up losing a life to them. However, once I spawned back in, I was able to take them out and clear level 5. The next level was the last one, and I still had a decent amount of lives remaining for it too. This one has you inside some sort of enemy base, and once again, the enemies have changed their appearance. Honestly, most of this level was kind of easy. There's 2 floors, and I just stayed along the top and played carefully. I realized I was pretty close to enough points for an extra life, so I grinded some enemies for a bit here too. Eventually, I reached this kind of nasty spot with laser guns all over the ceiling. I panicked and lost a life to them, but all I really needed to do here was go quickly. After this was the final boss. In the background was this huge missile rocket bomb thing, which I'm guessing was the weapon I was sent out to destroy. Kind of similar to the first boss, this one sends waves of enemies at you. They're a lot more difficult here though, and I lost a life pretty quickly. Only 2 more lives left. One of the guys dropped the missile power-up, and after clearing out a bunch of enemies, I realized I was damaging the big rocket in the background each time too. I tried to make sure I got rid of as many guys as I could with each shot, but between power-ups, I lost another life. Shoot, down to my last life. For a moment, I doubted I was doing things correctly, as it wasn't even clear I was damaging the weapon. However, with the last shot of a power-up, I did it. The missile started to blow up, and the boss was defeated. A final cutscene plays showing your character running away, and the game congratulates you for saving the world. After this, the credits played, and Russian Attack was complete. On to the review. This one was pretty fun, although it was definitely a bit more punishing than I personally would like. I do like tough games, but I'm generally not a fan of having to go all the way back to the start on game overs. The game wasn't too long, so it wasn't too bad, but I definitely would have preferred it if the game had even just a few continues or something. The game is pretty fast-paced and fun though, and I could definitely see this one being a fun one to go back and breeze through once you know the game well enough. Oh, and the soundtrack is pretty good too. All in all, it's a bit simple, but still a good time. I just personally wish it wasn't quite as punishing as it is. I gave the game a 7 out of 10. With Russian Attack complete, I have now finished 52 out of the 148 NES games in the challenge, meaning I am now 35.14% of the way through all of the NES games. If you've been paying close enough attention to these numbers, you might notice that something has changed since my last video. Basically, I've decided to count the Play Choice 10 games as NES games after all, since in the end, that's really all they are. There are a few exceptions to this, but I'll go over those once we reach them. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.